Hi, everybody. It's Leslie Spees. I'm addressing Hot Mess Nation, which is really just my Hot Mess Facebook page. But if there's anybody else that you guys think this video would benefit, please feel free to forward it on. I wanted to share a little bit more about my story and my journey. I was inspired by someone else who shared some of her testimony recently on a Facebook Live. So thank you, Anitra. I felt compelled after I heard that to share because I know that so many of us right now are just not doing okay. I'm in my 56th year and I have never seen the world so screwed up and with so many negative things going on. So I think that is impacting all of us and our mental health. So I wanted to share a little bit more about my story and my testimony. And I'll start when I was a tiny tot. I'm just kidding. I won't go that far back. But anyhow, just kind of sharing that as I was growing up, we really didn't go to church any kind of consistency. And I really didn't have a relationship with God at all until I was in my early 30s. So my first marriage was very difficult. It was not a healthy situation for me. We had two young girls, and the last couple of years of the marriage were particularly hard. And I did everything that I could. I'm definitely at fault for some of the issues that we had, but I tried to do everything I could to try to keep it together because I was a child of divorce and I didn't want my children to grow up in that situation. But by the time it was over, I had resigned myself that it was better than them growing up in that situation. So anyway, a couple of years before my first marriage ended, I started going to church sporadically, was exploring my faith. And during some of the difficult times, I spoke with the preacher a few times at the church. Couple of months before the marriage ended, we were at the beach and I couldn't sleep. So I was sitting out on the porch and watching the sunrise. And that is when I really found Jesus and made him Lord of my life. So shortly thereafter, the marriage ended, but I could feel him carrying me through everything. So the house sold quickly. We found a really nice townhouse that was perfect for me and the girls. It was close to my mom, who helped me out a lot. And I found a new job, was at peace with the situation to the extent that I could be, and really under the circumstances was doing as well as I really could have been. And a couple of years later, I met my husband, who is a wonderful, patient Christian man. He's been a blessing in my life. So I'm very thankful for that. And I do believe that God brought us together. He had two young girls as well. We had a matched set in terms of age. And I will say that it wasn't always the easiest, especially during middle school, as you can imagine, with four girls. But we made it through, and they have also been blessings in my life and also have been blessed with a young grandson. So that being said, that's a little bit of the history of my faith. So fast forward, I kind of over time, life got busy. It was such that I got preoccupied with other things, and I was not putting God first in my life, I'll admit that. And I wasn't spending time with him like I should. We went to church on and off, but we weren't as consistent as we could or should have been. So, fast forward, I was about to be an empty nester, and that whole thing is just difficult, I think, for many of us as parents, because we pour so much of ourselves into our children. So one of my daughters was at college, the other was getting ready to go to college. And the one that was at college was struggling with some physical and mental health issues, which was very challenging. I was in a job that was not the best for me and needed to make a change. My brain had always been crazy, going all over the place, but it was an overdrive. It was such that it was going places it didn't need to go. In addition to that, I was just kind of trying to figure out my purpose in the new stage of, or a new era of my life. So with all of that, I started praying. And I asked God to kind of show me a direction to start to bring some peace into my life. And I started feeling the nudge to write. So when I felt that, I kind of talked back to him. I was like, God, I'm kind of a mess, which is hence where the hot mess came from. I compare, I try to control, I'm impatient, I really like wine. Um, I also, just have a lot of issues. So surely you don't want me to share anything with other people to make them feel better, but I continued to feel that nudge. And so I started writing. And I know some of you that have known me for a while were probably surprised that Leslie was writing a Christian blog and later a book, but that's kind of the history of how that happened. So anyhow, I started writing about my issues, and that later evolved into the book, Confessions of a Hot Mess, From Mess to Message. And if you're on my Hot Mess Facebook page, you're probably pretty familiar with that. And if you've read it, you know about some of my issues. But as a part of that, I really became even a little more self-aware than I probably needed to be. So I started delving into a lot of my issues, and it was, somewhat healing for me and therapeutic. I started to use the word cathartic, but I can't say that word. So anyway, therapeutic will work. Anyhow, I started kind of peeling back the layers, learning a little bit more about myself. And one of the things that I realized was that as we walk through life, or at least for me, and I'm pretty sure it applies to everybody else, we accumulate mess. And that comes from our life circumstances. It comes from fear of failure, fear of rejection, all those kind of things. Some of it is a defense mechanism. Some of it is living in this world and the temptations and issues that are a part of that. But this mess can result in strongholds. And strongholds are negative mindsets that keep us apart from God. In all of that, I actually started a second book on that topic, but I'll come back to that. So with my first book, it took forever for it to be published. So I signed on with a small Christian publisher. It was really just a couple of ladies, and a year and a half in, I really hadn't started doing anything in terms of editing or stuff like that. I kept hearing that it was pushed back and that, there were the main editors was having some personal issues that were impacting the timeline. Anyhow, I began to realize that it wasn't going to get published. So I started looking at other options, and actually I found a hybrid publisher. And what that means is that you pay part, they pay part, and they help you with the cover and the editing and getting it published and all of those things. So that actually partnered with Kingdom Winds, and that was a good experience. But anyhow, so I started that process. But in between all of that, of course, we had 2020, which everybody was struggling. It was the pandemic, all kinds of crazy things going on in the world. 2021 was even a worse situation for me, and in fact was the worst year of my life. So in addition to all of the things going on in the world, in March of 2021, and we'll try to get through this without crying, but in March of 2021, my mother actually passed away. She had been struggling with depression, actually on and off throughout her life, pretty much. But the last 3 years of her life, or 3 years before the end of her life, my stepfather passed away, and she had really been depressed, and then COVID on top of that. So she had a bad fall. Nothing that was life-threatening or anything like that, but she wasn't going to be able to do for herself for a little while. So the day after the fall, we'd been to the emergency room, and the next day we were going to doctors and whatnot. And so we went back to her house after having several doctor's visits and picking up medication and that kind of stuff. And she encouraged me to go home for a little bit. She was going to rest, and that, just to come back later in the evening. So but when I came back to her house, I actually found her. She had committed suicide, and I tried to revive her, but it was too late, which obviously was a very traumatic experience, and I'll never be over it. But, we continue on as best we can. So in addition to trying to work on the estate and all of those things and getting her house cleared out to sell it, I fell and broke my foot, which for me is really difficult because I've always been a very active person and am pretty OCD about my exercise. So that was hard, and I was having some difficulties in my relationship with my daughter, who's continued to struggle some. All that said, the publishing of the book started really heating up in July of 2021. And it was the bright spot of my year. It kept me busy and distracted because there's a lot of things that you have to do leading up to that. And it was published in November. So I really felt God's hand in the timing of all of that. I was very frustrated, obviously before that, I didn't understand why it was taking so long, and I worked so hard on it and poured so much of my time and energy that I just wanted it to get published. But I really felt his hand in that. So as I mentioned, I've written a second book. I actually got a publishing deal. It's called From Hot Mess to God's Best, Decluttering Your Mess to Be Your Best. And as I mentioned before, I had come to realize that we all accumulate mess and that there are some strongholds that keep us apart from God. Some of those things include things like pride, comparison, perfectionism, fear, anxiety, stress. There's lots of different strongholds, but what I did in my book was really try to identify the most common, and I share information as well as stories from the Bible and steps that you can take to work to overcome some of those strongholds. So this is not a commercial for that book, but that will be coming out soon. And I use the acronym for what I want to achieve through that book, which to Hot Mess is helping others to make every stronghold scarce. So I thought I was pretty clever with that, but anyhow. So that should be in the works in the near future. But I kind of wanted to share my story. I think that there are a lot of people out there struggling right now. Of course, there are many parts of my story that I did not go into, but anyhow, I wanted to share a couple of things that I've learned. The first thing that I've learned is that I have to put God first in my life. I need Jesus every moment, every day, and I've come to realize that. I don't think I could have gotten through what I've gotten through without that. Second thing is, first love God, but then love other people. So I think that so many people are struggling. I think that if we can show them kindness and empathy, even small things can make a big difference. And then the third thing that I learned was that we can use our pain to help others. And I had a clever saying like that, finding purpose in our pain. So, I don't think I'll be ready real soon to help others that have loved ones that have committed suicide. But, there's small things that I can do up to that. And I think that eventually I will get there. One of the things that I did was get certified to teach mental health first aid classes. And I've done that in the business setting, and we spend so much time, so much of our time in work settings. Sorry, I'm not very articulate sharing this story, but we spend so much of our time in work settings that I think, if we can support others and help identify when they're struggling, and, maybe small kindnesses will make a difference. And, also as I have over the last years, sharing my hot mess posts and things that I struggle with, even if it just helps one or two people, it will have been worth the time and energy for me. So I wanted to share those things. I had some other notes, but I'm a little bit out of sorts. So, as I've said, it's a really difficult time in the world. So, be kind to others, be kind to yourself. If you feel like you need counseling, then get some counseling. You can go to the APA, American Psychological Association site, to locate a counselor in your area. In addition to that, there's a Christian counseling site that kind of works the same way. If you need any help locating those, please feel free to reach out. Also, if you are struggling, I would love to pray for you. And if you're struggling with any of the issues similar to what I've struggled with, then certainly reach out and I'll help you, or at least hook you up with resources that might be helpful. So that was what I wanted to share. Thank you guys for listening, and God bless.